set up. Fantastic. I was just going to say it is time to start that recording. Sarah's on it. She's got us all ready to rock and roll. So let's dive in to today's webinar. Welcome. I'm going to say first and foremost to all of you, thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy schedules to join us for today's webinar called Navigating Away from Legacy Technology. We have folks from across the country here. It is a stellar meeting of the minds of public servants who all bring a shared interest in exploring what are the ways that we might go about improving public services, especially those services that rely on legacy technology. My name is Kay, and I'm from Code for Canada. We are a national nonprofit organization, and I'm joined here today by our fearless leader, Dorothy. We also have the pleasure of being here with Jason from the Government of Nova Scotia. And his team recently partnered with Code for Canada on a project that you're going to hear a lot more about later on today. To begin, though, it's really important to acknowledge the land upon which we all sit. I'm calling in from the Haldimand Tract, which is a territory of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee people. The Haldimand Treaty of 1784 is a formally ratified agreement. It acknowledges 6 miles on either side of the Grand River as the treaty territory belonging to 6 nations of the Grand River. This territory is within the lands of that are protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum. We really encourage you folks to share a little bit about the treaty lands that you're calling in from today. You're very welcome to share that in the chat. And you can learn more about how to share this treaty information by visiting nativeland.ca. And I think we'll share that link in the chat too, so that you can have a look. Perfect. All right. So we're going to be spending the next hour together. So please feel free to make yourself comfortable. As I mentioned, you can keep your camera off, you can turn it on, whatever works best for you. A couple things that you're going to need for today. First, you're going to need a service to think about. This is ideally a service that your organization is delivering. You're going to use this service for the activity that we're going to do a bit later in today's session. You're also going to need the Assumptions Canvas worksheet. So this was the worksheet that we sent to you in the pre-email, and I believe we can also add it here in the chat. Fantastic, right on. And then finally, you're going to need to tap into those curious minds of yours and ask any questions that bubble up throughout the webinar. We're going to be using Slido to collect your questions. So again, we're going to pop the link for that in the chat. And at any point in time, if you have a question, feel free to add that into Slido. All righty. So to start things off, I have a question for you folks. Do any of these sound familiar to you? I'd love for you to give a thumbs up in the Zoom reactions if you have access to those, or give a good old thumb up with your camera if any of these sound familiar. I wish I knew more about how other similar services are using technology to improve their service delivery. Or maybe this one sounds familiar. I know our service could be better for users, but we have very unique constraints here. Maybe this one sounds familiar. Right now, I cannot rely on the technology that our service uses. This technology could fail literally at any time. Or a personal favorite, my head would hurt if I was asked tomorrow to write a business case to ask for funding for new technology for our service. Any of these sounding familiar to you folks? They're quite ubiquitous when it comes to experiences that folks within the public service face. I'm seeing a couple thumbs up, yeah, for sure. And to dive into this a little bit more, I'm going to turn it over to Dorothy, and she's going to talk a little bit about why these experiences are so often the norm within public service. Over to you, Dorothy.
Great, thanks, Kay. You can move to the next slide. So check out this statistic. This maybe looks like a big, scary statistic. And maybe some of you are actually familiar with this statistic. So the statistics being only 13% of large government IT projects succeed. This was found based off of a study done by a research group in Europe back in 2018. They studied, public sector IT projects and the success of those projects globally, and found this as kind of the success rate of government IT projects. And what they defined as success was essentially, did projects end on time, which is like within the time that they expected, and then also within the budget they forecasted. So when you think of that and you find that a success, 30% is not a high number. So what does this number have to do with legacy technology, which is what we're discussing here today? Well, there are essentially two concepts or two parts of a connected story or journey. So if we start with legacy technology, we all know that legacy technology is ubiquitous in every industry, but especially in governments. As many of us here know, there are big risks that come with legacy technologies. Think like security vulnerabilities, privacy concerns, the ongoing maintenance costs to now sustain a legacy system. That can lead to vendor lock-in and other downstream impacts. So we know that governments across Canada are constantly faced with this daunting task of figuring out what to do with their legacy systems. Do they burn it all down and rebuild it? Do they keep parts of it that are working and fix the parts that are not? Kind of like a why reinvent the wheel mentality. Or do they focus on modifying staff processes so they work around the legacy system? This kind of like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it mentality. The path to navigate away from legacy technology, as in what to do next, and towards establishing resilient and relevant systems, is full of uncertainties and also laden with risks. And so when teams approach these problems and make decisions without a holistic understanding of risks impacting their digital service, not only from a technology standpoint, which is the topic that we're discussing today, but also when we think of the people supporting that technology, the processes, and most importantly, the users that are involved in the digital service, this is where teams often end up in hot water unintentionally. So it's the downstream impact of not really looking at risks in a holistic way in order to inform decision-making when it comes to technology that is more likely to lead to projects that are over time and over budget, and relates to this statistic that we're seeing here. So what are we doing here today? Well, I'm very excited that myself and my colleagues, Kay and Jason, are going to talk to you about how to assess risks in the right way in order to gain greater confidence in finding the right option for a legacy technology moving forward. So what that looks like is you're going to hear about our options analysis service at Code for Canada that we have been refining and have been delivering for a number of years. That helps teams to assess a service's risk and then set up legacy technology modernization projects for success. You're going to hear directly from Jason from Government of Nova Scotia and how they're approaching legacy technology through options analysis. And then finally, as Kay mentioned, you're going to have this handy workbook, and we're going to get our feet wet to actually understand how you can use options analysis in your own work. So I will pass it now over to Jason from Nova Scotia's Department of Cybersecurity and Digital Solutions to tell us a little bit about CSDS.
Thanks, Dorothy. I'd say about a year ago, we really stood up a program where we really started to, think and dedicate our time into what is the risk we carry as part of our estate, which is really what this whole program has been about for us. Is we have, well, as it shows here, 800 services that we run as part of our organization and our partner organizations that, really we've been trying to get a good handle on, all right, what risk are we carrying day to day based on all these services? So we really started doing a deep dive into assessing every single service. So meeting with technical owners and business contacts about what risk that service carries. And so we've made it through about 90% now, which is incredible. We've assessed over 600 of these services now to really understand, all right, where are we at and where should we be targeting our funding and where should we be, targeting our investments into the future to make sure we're lowering the risk as an organization while also increasing the value we give to our clients and citizens. And so we've been working with Code Canada on this options analysis. We call it path analysis. So I may say that every now and then, but I'm meaning the same thing. To really I'll actually step back. One of the interesting things that we found in all of this is we often thought we knew what to do next. You had an old service, you knew what you need to do. Oh, it's a custom build, or no, we just need to install the new version. But through conversations and doing our assessments, we've learned that 9 times out of 10, that's not true. Uh, our services don't often meet the needs that they were intended for in the beginning. So spending more time upfront doing a service assessment to understand what the real needs are, what the real capacity constraints are, what getting something sustainable and supportable into the future, it's worth spending the time and money upfront to do the proper legwork to land on the right service. And as we start talking about things, it'll really come to what we thought we needed to do versus where we ended up is really cool. But I'm not gonna break that one now. I'll let that work out as we go. But yeah, we've done a lot of really great work, and we've really been concentrating on trying to assess our estate and making the right decisions into our future. Now I'll hand back to Kay.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Jason. So as Jason mentioned, his team's been hard at work assessing these services, and one such service that bubbled up as one needing, some attention, needing a better path forward, is a service called the Nova Scotia School Book Bureau, or quite simply, just Book Bureau. Now, Book Bureau, it's an incredibly important service for the province of Nova Scotia, and it wasn't in super great shape technology-wise. A little bit of context here, in case you're not familiar. So Book Bureau, it's a digital service that helps over 12,000 educators to access learning resources. So the things that they need to deliver quality education in Nova Scotia public schools. Ultimately, the purpose of Book Bureau is really about leveraging the collective buying power of the government in order to acquire resources in bulk, and as a result, help educators to really stretch their dollars that much further. That said, though, Book Bureau, it wasn't in great shape. So a couple things. One, the Book Bureau's website, so the educator-facing website where they go in and they make their orders for these learning resources, that website was created very, very many years ago and hadn't received many updates over time. And as a result, not too surprisingly, educators have expressed a lot of frustration about the website's lack of a user-friendly experience. And then finally, what Jason was mentioning, Book Bureau, it relied on some very outdated technology. And that technology posed a pretty profound risk of failure. And if it failed, that would have some major implications on educators and their ability to deliver education to the students of the province. All of that to say, Book Bureau, it needed a change. And so CSDS, they partnered with us from Code for Canada to help explore what are some of the options for Book Bureau's path forward. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, okay, but how exactly did you do that? How did you find better options for Book Bureau's legacy technology while also improving the overall service? I'm going to turn it back over to Dorothy, and she's going to tell you a little bit about the approach that we used.
Thanks, Kay. So really, before I talk about approach we used, let's remind ourselves of just kind of how traditional procurement typically works when it comes to making change in the public service. I feel like I don't really have to describe this picture too much. I'll just, quickly kind of talk at a high level of often it involves, you've got like a business team or an IT team wanting to make a decision to purchase something. That could be software, it could be services from a vendor or a consultant. And then procurement says, well, you're going to have to write that all up in a list of requirements. And so that team goes ahead and writes things in requirements and tosses it over the fence. And then maybe procurement says, this looks good or this doesn't look good, and tosses it back over the fence. And it just keeps getting tossed back and forth over the fence until maybe at the end, the thing that is the output might not really look like what that originally the team was looking for in terms of support or service in the first place. How this relates to options analysis is, as you can see in this diagram, this is not a super collaborative approach versus on the next slide, Kay, talking about options analysis, it is really a collaborative approach that's grounded in, kind of discovering technology options that meet multiple needs, whether that is kind of user needs, business needs, including like procurement needs, as well as ones that work within the organizational constraints. So at its core, this collection of activities and methodologies and frameworks that make up options analysis is all about really kind of gathering information about a service to uncover what's working well and what are the areas for improvement, and then identifying the options or the paths for the future. This kind of holistic approach of approaching a problem is really beneficial because it allows teams to kind of quickly make sense of the risks associated with a digital service. And then from there, also quickly gain alignment across stakeholders on the priorities of risks. And what that ultimately enables teams to do is to more quickly craft a good business case that outlines the path of least resistance so value can be delivered faster. In general, the options analysis approach kind of involves three phases. There's a problem phase where we define the problem space up front. And that's where we take a holistic view of all the current state risks. And then we move to kind of the range of possible solutions in the solution phase. And this is where we assess risks and their benefits based on what we've learned about the service in the previous problem phase. And then finally, we spend time verifying the recommended option to make sure that it is the right one, usually in the form of actual low fidelity prototyping, a prototype that we can put together and get feedback quickly, as well as foster buy-in into the path forward. So there's a lot here in this approach that sadly we don't have time today to cover. For this webinar, we're going to focus on the problem phase. So what that looks like is kind of summed up in this diagram, this simple pyramid diagram. So the guiding North Star, that question that we use to define the problem associated with the service or that problem space, is what are all of the blockers or the gotchas or the risks that would essentially prevent a team from delivering a user-centric digital service? So with that kind of North Star guiding question in mind, we can then break down all of the blockers or risks that kind of like pop to the surface into 4 core areas that are shown in this pyramid model. So we start at the top with the service layer, asking the question of, how well is the current service performing for its users? From there, after we've kind of looked at all the risks associated with the service, we then move to the product or platform layer. That's the next layer down, number 2. And in here, this is essentially also technology. So in our case, product and platform are the same, synonymous with technology. And so the question becomes, does the product or platform support user-centric digital services? After that, we then move to processes within the organization. Do the processes being followed at the organization and by teams enable the service to deliver continuous value to users? And then finally, we reach the base of the pyramid, which, as you can see, is the most important, as people always say, it's people. Which is, are the people involved equipped to sustain user-centric digital services? With that, I'm going to pass it over to Kay, who will now start to introduce our assumptions canvas worksheet, which will help you to start to take this pyramid model and apply it into your actual worksheet in front of you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dorothy. So we're at the activity portion of today's webinar. In a moment, we're going to walk you through the assumptions canvas worksheet. This is going to be a tool that's going to help you to structure your thoughts about your service. Now, the goal with this worksheet is to really get some of your initial assumptions, your initial ideas about your service down onto paper. In other words, this is a chance for you to think really holistically and to document what you know or what you believe to be true right now about the problems and the challenges that are impacting your service. This is a really, really fantastic opportunity and activity to do at the start of a project as a way for teams to, help avoid jumping to conclusions, really getting their assumptions out. So I'm going to ask you to pull up your assumptions canvas. Either you've got it printed out on paper or you've got a digital version of it. I'm going to give you just a few seconds to fill in the basics section. So the very top section where you're going to list out what is the service that you're going to be thinking about during today's activity. So I'll just give you a quick moment to fill that in. All right. Assuming that you've now chosen a service, we're going to walk through each layer of the pyramid that coincides with the section of your worksheet. All right. So the way this is going to go down is we're going to give some explanation and some examples for each section. And then we're going to pause and provide you with a few minutes of solo writing time to fill in your worksheet for that section. My suggestion as you're filling in each section is to keep things point form. Whatever ideas are top of mind for you, just get those down on paper. You might not finish filling out your section as you're going through each one. That's okay. You can always return to it and add more detail in after the webinar. All right, sounds good. Shall we get rocking and rolling with our first layer? We're going to look at the service layer of the pyramid and the service section of your worksheet. Now, as Dorothy was mentioning, the service layer, this is all about how well your overall service from a very big picture perspective is performing for its users. We are not right now getting into the specifics of your service's tech or processes. That's going to come in the next couple sections. Instead, we're thinking really big and how all of the different aspects of your service combine together to deliver value to users. Okay. In this service layer, we've broken it down into 3 sub-layers to really drive home this holistic understanding of the service. So when we're talking about service, we're talking about desirability. Does the overall service meet the needs of the people who use it? So the end users. Feasibility. Is the service fit for purpose? Does it do what it was intended to do? And finally, viability. Can the service be sustained within the organizational constraints? To help put this into context for you, let's use the example of Book Bureau. And we're going to hear from Jason about how things looked at the start of that project from the service perspective. Over to you, Jason.
Thanks. We already talked a little bit about this, so I'll try to be brief. So with Book Bureau, this was a super old, super legacy process. So when the team came in, they were really right away able to understand, and really deep dive, how is this service perform? Was it actually meeting the needs of the teachers who used it? And the clear answer was no, not even close. It was a dreaded service that nobody looked forward to having to use at any point in time. So when you really started to deep dive into it, when you look at the first layer for desirability, nobody was happy with this service. It didn't work. It was hard to support. It was hard to sustain. We didn't have a lot of people who even knew how it was built in the beginning. So it was legacy. We weren't keeping it up to date. Problems all over the place there. Frustration across the board from the support organization, from the users, everyone involved. Super frustrating for how this service was. Then from a feasibility perspective, people were able to get the job done. They were doing what they needed to do, but there was a lot of manual process there and a lot of integration points. We were using 3 or 4 different services to do what one service should have been able to do between, getting through the whole process. I'll walk more through that later as we talk. But, it was very manual and very painful for everyone involved for really doing what they needed to do. From a viability perspective, I already talked about it, super old technology, not viable to just upgrade and modernize. We had to do something different. So it was really about taking a step back and making sure we were doing the right thing and not just upgrading something for the sake of upgrading it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jason. All right, folks, it's now time for you to jot down some of your notes about your service. So we're going to spend the next few minutes adding in some bullet points for the prompts that are underneath that service section on your worksheet on page 1. This is going to be silent writing time, so nice and quiet. Let's take maybe 3 minutes, and I will let you know when the time is up. All right, folks, you can finish jotting down your last idea there. Know that you can always add more information later if you didn't get to answering all the questions in this section. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next layer of the pyramid, and Dorothy's going to walk us through what the product/platform layer is all about.
Thank you. So yes, the product platform layer, this is synonymous with the technology layer. So this is often where a lot of teams kind of jump straight to and start to kind of solution or figure out what the problems are with the legacy systems and like attack the problems at the technology layer. But what happens here is that actually there's a nuance in this layer. And so again, the question that we're asking here is whether the technology used for the service actually supports and enables user-centric digital services. So this one, similar to the service layer, is broken down into 3 sub-layers for added nuance. We start at the bottom, which is, again, that desirability. Does the technology serve user needs? How is the technology in terms of user centricity and accessibility? So often folks are, especially in government, some of them are really keen on understanding what is their accessibility kind of compliance and any kind of improvements in accessibility. And this is where this fits into the product layer. We then move to feasibility, which is the technology fit for purpose? What's the maintenance that's required of the technology? Or what is the kind of state of interoperability look like for this technology with other systems that it needs to interact with in order to deliver the service? And then finally, viability. So can the technology be sustained within the organizational constraints? what kind of oversight or legal constraints, kind of impact how the technology is sustained by the organization. So here I'm going to turn it back over to Jason to hear more about how what Book Bureau found for the technology of their service.
Thanks, Dorothy. I've already talked a lot about this. So really, when it comes to desirability, it was a painful old service that was not modernizable. It was difficult to use and difficult to support. So nothing good there. But that leads heavily into feasibility. We were integrating three solutions really into making this process: one for content, one for ordering, one for fulfillment and orders. All of them integrated, and some of the integrations were manual. So not even an automated way for end to end of this process. So super painful for everyone involved in the entire process and finding ways through it. And viability, old tech, unsupported hardware. I think we might even be down to one person who knows how it was built in the beginning. So not even great ways to modernize it. So now is the time for us to act on this one, which is really why we picked it as our pride candidate for this process.
Great. So now over to the worksheet again. Once again, you're going to have time to kind of jot down some notes about your product or platform for your service. So we'll give you around 2 minutes to just jot down some bullet points within the product platform section of your worksheet, and that would be on page 2. And we'll just take a couple minutes of silent writing time, and then we'll move on to the next layer of the pyramid. Alrighty, I think our 2-minute timer is up. So we're going to move on to the next layer of the worksheet, which is now the process layer. So we're getting deeper and deeper kind of into the mechanics of what is required to sustain a user-centric service. So in the process layer, here's where we start to explore internal processes that are being followed in order to support the service, and whether those processes are actually enabling the service to kind of deliver continuous value to users. So here's where we start getting into areas like planning, project planning, project budgeting, seeking approvals for kind of new features or enhancements of the service or the technology, understanding what's the processes required internally to upkeep the service. And I mentioned up top, the other P word, procurement. Procurement processes would also be captured in this layer. So again, I'm going to turn it over to Jason to hear more about the process layer and what we found in the Book Bureau service.
So this is a super interesting one for us because, uh, you know, with this, we had actually, before we engaged Code for Canada, we had done an RFI to really try to figure out a market scan of what was out there. And so we had submitted one out to the industry and we got zero responses. So we had done a book bureau, sent it out saying, hey, we want to know what's out there. And we got nothing back, which we were like, all right, what do we do now? We were all internally thinking this was going to be a giant custom build that needed to be done internally, and we didn't have capacity for that. That was a capacity problem, both money, people, support, all the way around. The idea of custom building something here was not something that we really wanted to tackle, but is kind of where our all of our minds were when we started and engaged Code for Canada on this. We're like, well, let's validate that through doing this path analysis on the product to determine, yeah, what do we really need to build is what we were expecting to come out of all this. And so this was really about, making the right decisions so we could figure out how to spend our money right, which is why we did the path analysis of, let's do the research, let's get it all done right so we can actually be successful in our funding ask as well. Because nowadays, if you just go and say, hey, I want to custom build something, you're going to get yeah, not going to happen from Treasury Board. So now we wanted to make sure we did the due diligence of, all right, we've done the market scan, we've done all this. We know we need to custom build. It's going to cost us X and we'll do it right. So we'll get the money. And so that's kind of where we all landed. It was all about making the right decisions at this level. And the outcomes are really interesting.
Great. Thanks, Jason. Okay, so now back to the worksheet. It's time for you folks to jot down some notes about your service from a process perspective. So we'll spend, again, a couple minutes, heads down, silent writing time, just writing some bullet points on reflecting on these prompts for the processes required to support service delivery.
All right, folks, you can finish jotting down your last idea there for the process section of your worksheet. And we're going to move on to the final section, the people section. So this looks at whether folks involved in the service are equipped to, quite frankly, sustain a user-centered digital service. So for example, are the leaders within your organization champions of user-centric services? Are the people who are responsible for maintaining the technology given access to adequate training? Are the conditions within the organization for bringing on the talent needed to deliver user-centric services, are those conditions good? Are they very restrictive? So finally, we're going to turn it back over to Jason to hear how this people layer looked like for Book Bureau.
And so I've alluded to this a little bit about our capacity. And that's actually the thing that we liked most about this process was that capacity was front and center. The ability to support, the ability of the people to do, the ability of the teachers to order, and all like through the entire process, how usable and supportable a potential solution could be, and the current solution not being was centric to the entire process because it's really the driver for us as an organization. Everyone's trying to do more with less. We all know that. We're all in that boat. So the ability to optimize and use our people in the best possible ways is a focus for us on everything we do. So really driving that home here was critical to us. And when it comes to Book Bureau, we didn't have capacity to modernize it. We didn't have capacity to continuously improve it. It was too old, too legacy. Everything about it was bad. So it really just sat on the shelf and did its job, getting worse and worse every year. So that was kind of our driver here.
Thanks so much, Jason. All right, folks, last time we're turning it over to you to fill out the people section of your worksheet on page 2. So again, this is going to be silent writing time. We'll have about 2 minutes and we'll let you know when the time is up. All right, everyone, you can finish adding in your last thought or two, and we will conclude our time with our worksheet. Now, again, you might not have filled in all of the sections to the level of detail that you would hope, so you might need to revisit the worksheet afterwards and add in a little bit more information. From there, though, you will be ready to take the next step, which is to validate your assumptions. Or in other words, to spend some more time within that problem space. And the goal here is to really check whether your assumptions are indeed correct and or fill in any gaps. So questions that you weren't able to answer, interesting. Let's find some of that information. Now, on the final page of your worksheet, there are some suggestions about how you might go about validating your assumptions. Know that Code for Canada is here to help, so do reach out if of interest. The final thing that I'll say just around validating assumptions is that it's a really, really crucial step for options analysis. If you only take away one thing from today's webinar, let it be this: finding the right options to replace your legacy technology. It really becomes a whole lot easier and a whole lot less risky when you've grounded yourself in a really strong understanding about your service's current challenges and opportunities. All right, so to really drive this message home, we're going to turn it back over to Jason one last time to fast forward us through to the end of the options analysis project of Book Bureau. Jason, after all of the work of starting with assumptions, validating those through research, and then using all of that information to inform the options for Book Bureau, what can you tell us about the final outcome?
This is actually the most exciting part of the whole thing for us is, so when we started to bring it all the way back, we were using this as a validation for us to justify our custom build. That is what all of our assumptions internally were. Big custom build, we need a team, we need to get some FTE, we need to do all of this to be able to have the capacity to support this big solution. So then we went through the entire process, really brought it all the way back to user needs, what the solution was, and out pops at the end of this, Shopify. Shopify, an easy to use, easy to deploy software as a solution, low cost, continuously improved, easily updated, meets 98% of our users' needs in a quick and easy to deploy SaaS solution that nobody internally thought was even viable or on the table, which is the most incredible thing of all of this, that nobody in government thought that Shopify was a solution that could meet this. And so then at the end of this, we had this incredible report that Code for Canada built, which was the quality is unparalleled, I have to give right there. Super high quality product we got from Code for Canada that we brought to procurement, and they looked at it and said, sounds great. We didn't have to jump through hoops. We didn't have to do anything hard. We've already started a procurement process. We've got a team onboarded now. We're building out our MVP. We're intending to have an MVP deployed by Christmas, which is, 3 months. Like all of this, when we expected a multi-million-dollar custom in-house build, and now we're a fraction of the cost. We're going to meet the user's needs 10 times over. It's going to be usable and modern, and they'll be able to do it on their phones. Like it's excitement all the way around. It's an incredible outcome for a process that we did not expect.
Right on. I love the energy hearing you speak about this, and I know that that energy is echoed across all of the many stakeholders who were involved with Book Bureau. There was a lot of surprise with that, final recommendation of Shopify, and then a lot of, that actually makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Like the amount, whenever we've said Shopify the first time in executive room, they're like, wait, what? Is usually the response I get is they're like, no, that can't, we're government. That's not something that would meet our needs. But 100% all the way across the board. It's pretty cool. I'm excited to see the MVP rollout.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, Jason and Dorothy, for walking through, sharing this case study of how options analysis really helped Book Bureau to understand the problem space and ultimately arrive at this very novel path forward. For the remainder of our time, we're going to turn it over to all of you and hear some of the questions that you've been entering into Slido. So I'm going to be our moderator, and I'm going to pose some of the questions from Slido over to Jason and Dorothy. So maybe let's start with a first question here. Allow me to see. Okay, so folks, how can teams bridge the gap between the legacy systems knowledge that's held by longtime employees and the skills required for newer technologies? Maybe we'll see if we can get Sarah and Val to pop that into the chat for you, just so you can follow along as well. But Dorothy, Jason, would either of you like to go first and share your thoughts?
Sure, I can jump in first, and actually, I'm going to peg my response actually to the ending of the story that Jason just described, of kind of like what we did today with this worksheet and the pyramid model that we showed you as a reminder in the options analysis process was merely just the problem definition phase. So as Kay says, it's essentially listing all of your assumptions and going through a process of validating those assumptions. What we didn't get to is essentially, what do we do with that now? And how do we now translate that into a decision as to kind of like the best path forward? And so going back to this question of, how can teams kind of bridge the gap of supporting old legacy systems versus supporting new systems? I think that kind of what needs to be asked before that question is actually which is the path that makes the most sense for that organization or that team. It might be, as Jason mentioned in this other example that we worked with them on, is in their specific case, the service was on its last legs, and there was a recommendation made to go with a off-the-shelf solution that's like meets all the kind of privacy, security requirements, easy to maintain. In that case, the path forward that would make sense for an organization like Nova Scotia would be to partner with a group that can then develop that solution. And so that kind of responds to that question of like, how do teams bridge the gap? Well, it actually starts from a place of, we assume, we know that we are not capable, I'm assuming I'm a government team, we're not capable of sustaining this thing ourselves. We also know we want a values aligned partner that's ready to prototype, develop this in an agile way, prototype digital solutions that we can test them with real users and make sure that we're not like, putting all our eggs in one basket and building something that like cannot be sustained by us or the vendor. And so that what happens is this kind of discovery process helps to inform a healthier conversation that a government team can have with a vendor in figuring out what that path forward looks like to sustain the solution. So that's my quick response. I don't know, Jason, you want to jump in too?
Sure. And it's an interesting conversation because we have a lot of people who have been doing, development of old technologies for a long period of time. And now it's about retooling. Now it's about changing what you do into the future and not about necessarily about learning new technology anymore, because as Dorothy's mentioned, it's more about partnering now. So now we're turning our senior technical people into product owners who understand the service needs and all of that stuff and are able to work with a partner now to do the actual hand-on legwork. And they're moving up a level. They're moving more into the owning the process and owning the product more than, I'm in there as a Java developer helping fix something anymore. So it's more about that now as we move into the future and finding the right partners who can help us do it right.
Wonderful. Thank you both. All right, we got another question, which is, any thoughts on service, measurement, and performance? Do the 4 pillars of, I'm assuming we're talking about our lovely pyramid, inform measurement and performance? How do you measure improvements over time?
Love that question. I think that whoever asked that question, if your organization is already capturing service measurement metrics and performance metrics, kudos to you. That is excellent. Things like time to completion, customer satisfaction rates, time, like moments of the service where users are dropping off. Those are really important metrics that obviously tell us important information about the quality of a service. And I think where most of those data points lie in terms of the investigation of, working through the worksheet and looking through the layers of that pyramid, a lot of that will kind of bubble up in that service layer up top. And so those things like, those metrics are probably the first things that you're going to start surfacing as you kind of start assessing the service. There are probably many of you out there who are responsible for services that aren't collecting metrics, and that's quite common too. And I think what this framework or this methodology starts from a place of actually assuming that teams likely aren't capturing service metrics, which is fine. And so you can still this is a structured way to assess a service, even if you don't have the metrics. But if you do, more power to you.
I think you've really covered it off. Like, we don't really do a lot of metrics collecting. We're just starting to with our whole, legacy service assessments. That's when we started to collect metrics, and it's not even to that level yet. With governments, I've found we're bad at this, but we're slowly getting there. We're starting to, and we're concentrating more on the risk side of the house now. What risk does it carry, and following the risk as we modernize the service and how it decreases is really the metrics that we've been tracking and how we've been managing things.
Wonderful. All right. I think we have time for one last question, knowing that we have a few other questions that we probably won't have time to get to, and we can certainly send responses for those in our follow-up message to you all. But our last question is, I would say probably pointed at Jason to start. So how does this options analysis, path analysis process fit into your existing digital governance over at the government of Nova Scotia?
Really, it's been everything for us. It's how we are trying to make our funding decisions and make our investment decisions going forward. It's actually pretty incredible. One of the biggest things that's come out of all of this is we've had a lot of, as we've done our service assessments, say that we have 30 or 40 in there that we thought we knew what we need to do. Oh, these just need upgrades. But as we've learned more about our options assessments, we're like, wait a minute, do they really just need an upgrade? Like before, a year ago, we would have immediately thrown money at that and said, go upgrade that technology. Now we're not doing that anymore. Now we're like, no, these all need an options assessment. We don't spend money on something until we've options assessed it anymore, which is crazy that we've taken a giant step back, that we aren't investing in you until we know that what you're doing is the right thing for our future. And our future as an organization, is it supportable? Do we have capacity to support it? Is it the right security standpoint? Is it, does it meet our users' needs? All of those questions need to be answered before we throw money at it now, because of this process. A year ago, we wouldn't have done that. Now we don't tend to spend money unless you've been through that process. It's pretty crazy.
It's amazing. Dorothy, any last words to say about that?
I'll just tag on to everything Jason said, that something that we uniquely see as like a nonprofit that worked with many government teams across Canada. Many of them maybe have kind of existing digital standards, or are working towards having kind of ubiquitous digital standards that they can apply as a form of governance across all ministries or departments. Is that the feedback that we've often heard from actual teams that are doing the work, that are like delivering a service, building technology, sustaining a service, is what we've found is that teams often reflect that it's digital standards are nice to have. Obviously, they're very important, but they're hard to translate from from like a governance layer, or like a standard layer, into the day-to-day. Like, how do we actually use these standards to guide our day-to-day decision making, so that ultimately we're taking baby steps towards shipping better services for users. And what we found is that, working with Jason and his team, is that options analysis and this kind of assessment framework allows us to kind of break down all of these digital standards that are out there, and actually put them in a more tangible way that people can relate them to their day-to-day. And so a bit more applicable, I think, from the feedback that we've heard as well.
Wonderful. All right, folks. We are sadly at the end of our time together. I feel like there are many more great conversations that we could have. However, we also know that you folks have lots of important, impactful work to get back to. So we'll leave it at that. You'll be seeing a follow-up message from us